Hey everyone, welcome to this session where we discuss the daily news, the important news that is relevant for your CLAT and other entrance examinations, and the news that you should be aware of as far as your national and international issues are concerned. Today is one of the most important news is a Supreme Court judgment that talks about free speech. So let's start the session with that news. There is no need for extra curbs on free speech of ministers, Supreme Court has said. So the Supreme Court has said that there is no reason to impose additional restrictions on the right to free speech of ministers, and the government is not vicariously liable. See, whenever a minister says something, maybe in the defense of the government or regarding a state policy, will the government be made vicariously liable for what the minister says? The Supreme Court says no. So the government is not vicariously liable for disparaging remarks made by them, even if the comments are traceable to state affairs or meant to protect the government. A statement by a minister, even if traceable to any affairs of the state or for protecting the government, cannot be attributed vicariously to the government by invoking the principle of collective responsibility. So the judgment was endorsed by Justice Abdul Nazir, Justice B.R. Gavai, Justice A.S. Bopanna, and this was given by V. Ramasubramaniam. It is not possible to extend this concept of collective responsibility to any and every statement orally made by a minister outside the House of the People or the Legislative Assembly. The Prime Minister or the Chief Minister does not have disciplinary control over the members of the Council of Ministers. This was actually the second news is extension of this, where it says that the Prime Ministers and the Chief Ministers they do not have any disciplinary control. In India, when most of the time we have coalition government, a prime minister or a chief minister cannot have disciplinary control over individual ministers. So there is a multi-party system. So a PM or a CM cannot afford to crack the whip every time a minister makes a statement which may either be in bad taste or disparaging. The Prime Minister or the Chief Minister does not have disciplinary control over the members of the Council of Ministers. Uh, the judgment also said that a strong Prime Minister or Chief Minister will be able to drop any minister out of the cabinet. But in country like ours, where there is a multi-party system, where coalition government are often formed, it is not possible at all the time for a PM or a CM to take whip and whenever the statement is made by someone in the Council of Ministers. Governments which survive on wafer thin majority sometimes have individual members who are strong enough to decide the very survival of such government, and this problem is not unique to our country. Further, Justice Nagarthana has a bit differing opinions. She is more strict regarding the comments you make, the speeches you make. So she says that the public functionaries, and not only the ministers, but also the celebrities and the people who are heard in the public, who have influence over the public. So the public functionaries should be more responsible in their speech. So hate speech denies human, brings the right to dignity. Justice B.V. Nagarthana said in a separate opinion in a constitution bench judgment, warning public functionaries, celebrities, and ministers to be careful about what they say in public. She said the right to dignity of a common man cannot be sacrificed at the altar of free speech if the statements made by the dignitaries created inequality and vilified sections of society or individuals. Every citizen must consciously be restrained in speech and exercise the right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a) only in the sense that it was intended by the framers of the Constitution to be exercised. Article 19(1)(a) does not vest with citizens unbridled liberty to utter statements which are vitriolic, derogatory, unwarranted, have no redeeming purpose, and which in no way amounts to a communication of ideas. So they have to be responsible before speeching, and the freedom of speech and expression cannot be taken for granted. There are reasonable restrictions for that freedom of speech and expression. In a separate judgment, Supreme Court has said that cinema halls can decide on permitting outside food inside the theaters. So the Supreme Court has ruled that the owners of cinema halls, of course it's a private property, So the owners of the cinema halls will decide whether they allow the outside food or not. Actually, the court has set aside a direction of the Jammu and Kashmir High Court that had directed multiplex and cinema hall owners that not to prohibit moviegoers from carrying their food articles and water inside the theaters. So, hearing a batch of pleas challenging the direction, a bench of Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud and Justice P.V. Narasimha observed that cinema hall is a private property of the owner who is entitled to have terms and conditions so long as they are not contrary to public interest, safety, and welfare. So the Jammu and Kashmir High Court directed not to prohibit them from carrying the food and water inside, but the Supreme Court says that it's totally the discretion of the owners whether they allow it or not allow it. It's totally on the owners of the cinema halls whether what they think fit. Then there is this regarding religious conversion. This news that not all religious conversions are illegal. So this is regarding the Madhya Pradesh Freedom of Religion Act 2021, and you must be aware of this act that there should not be any forced conversion, any conversion by fraud. So prevent any forced religious conversion. This act was there, but the court is saying that we should not presume that if any conversion is happening, we should not assume that it is illegal. So the Supreme Court has observed that all religious conversions cannot be presumed by a state to be illegal without while agreeing to hear a Madhya Pradesh government appeal against a High Court decision freezing a mandatory provision requiring a person who desires to convert to another faith to give 60 days prior intimation to the district magistrate. So if a person wants to convert to another religion, he has to give a 60 days prior notice to the district magistrate. But in such a situation, do we assume that this conversion is illegal? The Supreme Court says no. A bench led by Justice M.R. Shah issued a notice but refused to order an interim stay of the High Court order, even as Solicitor General Tushar Mehta for Madhya Pradesh argued that conversion in the country is based on marriage. Mr. Mehta said that conversion largely happened in the countries by marrying a person of another faith. The provision did not ban interfaith marriages, but only acted as a safeguard against forcible or illegal conversion. He contended that Section 10 of the 2021 Act was on the same subject matter with Section 5 of the Madhya Pradesh Dharm Swatantra Dharm Swatantrata Adhiniyam of 1968, which was upheld by a constitutional bench in one of the Supreme Court cases. Mr. Mehta submitted that the 1977 verdict had held the word propagate in Article 25 of the Constitution did not the right to convert another persons to one's own religion, but to transmit or spread one's religion by an exposition of its tenets. The Constitution bench had held that there was no fundamental right to convert another to one's own religion. Freedom of religion was not guaranteed in respect of one religion only, but covered all religions alike. India said to eyes $17 billion cut in food and fertilizer subsidies spent. Now, amidst the elections, this is a big news. The 26% reduction in subsidy spending is aimed at reining in fiscal deficit. So, India aims to cut spending on food and fertilizer subsidies to 3.7 trillion in the fiscal year from April, a 26% cut from this year, two government officials have said. Food and fertilizer subsidies alone account for about one-eighth of India's total budget spending of 39.45 trillion this fiscal year, but reductions in the food subsidies in particular may prove politically sensitive with elections looming on the horizon. The government expects to budget about 2.3 trillion for food subsidies in the coming fiscal year compared with 2.7 trillion for the current year, the two officials have said. How legal is Israel's occupation? See, the United Nations General Assembly ended 2022 by passing a resolution that asked the International Court of Justice to render its opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's prolonged occupation of Palestine. Israel's occupation of Palestine. So now what will happen? The two things can happen. The International Court of Justice, it has been referred to International Court of Justice. So it can either lead to a settlement with a party withdrawing its case, or it can lead to a trial followed by a verdict. Now, please understand that the rulings of the International Court of Justice are binding, but the ICJ has no power to enforce them. And currently, the six party right wing coalition of Israel has five ultra dogs and far right Jewish nationalist parties. There are fears that the new hardline regime will bring damaging impacts for Palestine, as several of Mr. Netanyahu's key allies, including most of the religious Zionist parties, are ultra nationalist West Bank settlers. So, amidst these, the new government in the Israel, the new prime minister in the Israel, these are the speculations, and it remains to be seen the action taken by the International Court of Justice, whether the case gets withdrawn or it goes to the trial. And let's see what happens here. Then there is this news that we already covered regarding online gaming. So there is this new draft amendment with respect to online gaming, and how the industry has responded. Let's see. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has released draft amendment in relation to online gaming. The idea is to ensure that online games are in conformity with Indian laws and to safeguard users against potential harm. Actually, the proposal is aimed at safeguarding the interest of users by introducing set procedures and norms for verification and user engagement, and many have considered it as a good move. Experts have welcomed the government's initiative to bring online gaming under certain central regulation. This will help curb the menace of anti-national and illegal offshore gambling platforms. And However, there are some concerns as well. The rules still bucket all gaming intermediaries into a broad category, irrespective of how large they are, what is the size of that, what is the risk involved. They all require similar compliance, including they need to have an office in India. So this will discourage the foreigners to set up offices in India to uh, enter this industry as far as the Indian population is concerned. So this can make it difficult for global players to start their services in India. So experts have welcomed the government's initiative to bring online gaming under the central regulations. However, there are some concerns as well. So regarding that, we have this article on the Hindu. So that's about it. Then these were some important news. Let's quickly have a look. The most important news was regarding the free speech, that the Supreme Court has said there is no need for extra curbs on free speech of ministers. And the prime ministers, chief ministers, they do not have any disciplinary control over members of the council of ministers regarding what they say outside the house of people, outside Lok Sabha or the legislative assemblies. And the public functionaries should be more responsible in their speech, as per Justice Nagaratana. Supreme Court has also said that cinema halls can decide on permitting outside food, whereas the Jammu and Kashmir High Court had ordered the cinema owners not to prohibit people from carrying food and water inside. Then there is another news regarding Madhya Pradesh Freedom of Religion Act 2021, that all religious conversions are not illegal. It should not be assumed as illegal just because the matter came before the court. India is said to have 17 billion dollar cut in the food and fertilizer subsidy, and Israel's occupation. This was also an article that is important today regarding Israel's occupation of Palestine, how legal it is, and what will be the consequences now that we have a new government in Israel. And regarding regulation of online gaming, we have the pros and the cons. That's all for right now. Thank you so much. See you in the next session with more set of news.